Right, thank you everyone. Welcome to the first session of the Rail Live seminars. This one's all about digitalisation and how to make it happen in a changing structure of the industry, and I think it's one of the most important things that's going to, most radical changes it's going to go through in rail. It's going through many changes at the moment. Digitalisation is maybe not talked about as much as maybe it should be. But you know, as we go through a time of structural change, that makes it doubly challenging to digitise everything. And I'm a technology journalist by background before I came to rail, and I've over the decades I've tracked the digitalisation of other industries, and now it's coming to rail. It's coming a bit more slowly to rail than perhaps other sectors, which is something that we can, you know, is another factor to consider. Yeah, so you know, the question I suppose is, why is it so hard to unlock the value of digital innovation in rail? But before we get into that, before we get into the first question, let's start the panel introduce themselves. Start to my left.
Hello. Richard Adams, I'm Group Head of Architecture at DFTO. Prior to that, I spent a few years as Head of Architecture at LNER, building the technical spine of their transformation. And prior to that, I worked on the launch of Xbox One, the Royal Shakespeare Company, BBC, Sky, and I've been working with emerging media since the early 90s. And I'm a practicing artist working with computation.
Rafael Liechti, I'm based in Switzerland from DXE, and within DXE, I lead the rail industry globally. I have a long background with rail. I've been working with rail for 15 years, and I oversee all the accounts that we have globally. So I see the innovation happening at different places, at different speeds, in a different way, and that's what we want to discuss today.
So firstly, apologies about being the last man in an all-man panel, but my name's Steve Neighbour. I am chartered civil engineer. I've been in the rail industry for 28 years, working across rail maintenance and capital infrastructure projects, so new bits of railway across TfL and London Underground. I'm on this panel though because I'm currently leading the Network Rail drive to improve our data management across the way that we deliver engineering work as well. So good to be on the panel.
Okay, and
she's here.
And we have our last panel member. So. Hello. That's all right. Okay, if you want to mic up over, sorry, actually we're using just the handheld mics, so when you can, and I'll kick off though to my left. First question. So it strikes me that rail is quite slow compared to some other sectors to innovate, perhaps, and now sometimes there might be good reasons for that. It's safety critical. It's a large monolithic, you know, it's a huge infrastructure, physical infrastructure with a lot of history. So, but this is something actually I've been talking to some people like Jeremy Westlake about, and it's interesting to hear what their take is. But at a time of all this change, why is it so hard? What are the obstacles to innovation in rail, and why is it so hard to unlock the value of digital innovation? So it's a bit of a broad question.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a full 1 hour talk in itself, isn't it? In essence, what my observations are quickly from being in the industry just a handful of years and coming from slightly more energetic industries in terms of innovation, I'd say there's a legacy of 30 years of being private and being all separate organisations where you're trying to change cultures and mindsets. And I'm including the TOCs, the third parties, etc. in that. I don't think it was ever thought through properly how to make that ecosystem work as well as it could have. So when we've come off the end of it now, we're facing an uphill battle and a tsunami of tech coming in, and we're still operating in our silos to some extent. And you know, at DFTO, we're obviously we've been put in place to bring together the TOCs as they're renationalised. And one of the things there I found, I've only been there since before Christmas, and we've got a new CIO and we've got a couple of other new people like myself coming in. We're having to do a lot of remedial work using advanced tech to get around some of the problems. So I'll just finish with one thing. One of the projects we're working on quite heavily at the minute is how we build and deal with TOC data and how we take it and standardise it so that it can serve easily other emergent services that we haven't even thought of. And so we're well into, very quickly, we've done it in about 3 months so far, building a data interchange that takes 10 use cases. And we're not thinking in terms of TOCs, we're not thinking in terms of DFTO, we're thinking in terms of trains and passengers. So what are 10 key use cases for both the business and passengers? And how can we standardise them? And just to finish, the first one of those that we set off with was train loading data. When I got in, we found that train loading data just seems to be random. People have applied their own measures to it. Even the average weight of different people when trains are weighed is different depending on the train company and depending on the whoever. So we're having to use the new tech to standardise that stuff. And then we will produce feeds that the Rail Data Marketplace and other new initiatives can use and can trust that is standardised. And I'm hoping that in a year or so, a passenger can see that the train arriving is a bit busy, so they could wait 10 minutes and get the next one, which is emptier. And that seems to me to be a very small but very important statement of approach to the future.
Okay. Rafael. Yeah.
From my point of view, it's also important to consider the goals that you need to achieve as a railway, and that's primarily safe and reliable transport. It's not a futuristic experience, it's safety and reliability. So when you think about innovation, you can't just be the first mover, you probably more the first follower, because you don't want to put your operation at risk. You want to ensure that it's all in a way, especially when you think about the front line, the train drivers and the operational people, they still need to be in control and they want to be in control. So we need to create innovation that puts their priorities first and that they are comfortable using that innovation as well. You can't just bring the latest tech. I think it's a big aspect that needs to be considered, which is change management. And that's all brought together. And I think like that, from innovation at different levels, we can really innovate, but it might not be at the speed of other experienced companies.
Okay. Neda, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Yeah. Hello everyone, I'm Neda Naqshbandi. I'm a technical director in Atkins Realis, which we are working very closely with a variety of clients in the railway.
And you're also on the GBRX
Yes.
AI
yeah, I
panel
was
as well.
in the AI advisory panel who shaped GBRX to shape the national AI strategy for the railway, and we launched that on the 28th of April in the Science Museum.
Main challenges for digitalisation and innovation in rail, and the main obstacles, what do you think?
I would say most of the problems that we have in rail is across boundaries. And the rail structure at the moment is very boundary-based. And these result into actually only optimize in local places, and we don't achieve system-level improvement. So we don't have a shortage of innovation at all, but what we are struggling with is how we scale innovation in a very fragmented environment. And most of the problems are system-level, but the data, the decision right, the incentives and the delivery models are organized locally or contractually. So even when you have a pilot, a very like highly innovative, successful pilot technically, when you try to scale that up across train and truck, across private operators, suppliers, this is where you face real problems, because scaling up is not a technical problem anymore. It is a governance problem, it's an operating model problem, it's a contractual problem, like how you secure long-term procurement, and most of the innovations like AI initiatives are very different from old initiatives. Like we are used to deterministic approaches and systems and legacy systems, and now all this AI comes with a lot of probabilistic approaches, uncertainties, and we don't have the right procurement and commercial structure in place for all of that. So another thing that has already been mentioned by Rafael, do I pronounce your name correctly, is rail is a safety critical environment. So the whole deployment of innovations pathway will change because any failure wouldn't only have commercial consequences. We affect asset, we affect people, we affect operation, we have public trust issues. So that's why we need higher level of assurance, we need higher level of human oversight, we need life cycle monitoring of innovation, and we need ownership. You know, this is how we see this through the GBRX lens at the moment.
Okay. Steve, yeah.
I agree with Richard's point. It's if you look at the history of the industry, it is quite disconnected. We've recently had a drive from an infrastructure point of view in terms of the installing new assets and managing of that assets. We've gone through a devolution approach, so different approaches in each part of the country. There is a real drive and understanding, though, now that standardization is key for the deployment of AI. That common terminology is so key for the way that we control our data and therefore then improve that data. There is a full recognition of that. I'm part of the GBR design team as well, and embedded in that design is a recognition of what we do need to change for day one of GBR and what we don't need to change for day one of GBR. So I think we've gone through an industry of recognizing standardization is now key. The next challenge for us as an industry is to agree what do we really need to change for day one of GBR, and actually what do we need to change for further development of GBR as well.
Okay, right. Yes, Chris, quickly.
Sorry, it's a quick follow-up to this point about struggling to innovate. Innovation's a mindset problem. I said this last week at the AI Summit, and I said it a couple of weeks ago at whatever the previous rail. I'm losing track of them, but UK Rail, was it? UK Rail, thank you. Yeah. There's a huge mindset problem. You let safety get in the way of thinking different. I'm not saying you should abandon safety, but you let the boundaries of safety stop you thinking outside that and testing. And this is the thing with innovation. If you look across whole sectors, you see one or two big companies producing amazing products and new things. What you never think about are the 100,000 companies that have failed or don't get there. But they are the companies that are testing the boundaries. You know, we only ever look at the Microsofts and the OpenAIs and the this, that, and the other. Test your ideas, test your thinking, and see whether you're letting yourself get pulled backwards. Whenever you're presented with I'll stop in a second. Whenever you're presented with a problem, ask, is there a different way of doing this? Is this really what I'm trying to do? And there might not be, but there might be. Sorry.
Okay, very quickly, Steve, because
when Apple introduced the iPhone, it did not have copy and paste. It did not have a camera on the front of the phone. We as an industry will walk around the show today and see a new iPhone and say, has it got AI built in? Has it got whatever the new iPhones have? Has it got a zoom lens? And we'll reject it as an industry because it's not that perfect product. We need to be brave like Apple were and introduce the basic and then iterate from it.
Product, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. Okay, lots of different, a huge range of things there. And they echo a lot of things that I've heard recently from Jeremy Westlake and Tevfik Mashnukash, the GBRX. One of the things that was mentioned, I think, and I heard them talking about, is that there's many successful pilots. We've got a lot of pilots, and we're quite good at those. But there's fewer examples of scaled transformation. So what needs to change to go from experiments to mass adoption?
That is exactly what I spoke about at the AI Summit last week. How can I summarize that quickly? Again, I think there's always the mindset. You've got to learn to play a little bit and to test things. You can mentally test things. But you've got to think, the message I gave last week, I think, was that you think of pilots are like growing plants in a greenhouse. Everything's controlled. It's a complete ecosystem in a box. But actually, when you're out in the wild, and this was done with the context of AI, so AI proofs of concepts are in a greenhouse, but actually real AI or real innovation or real change is out in the full glory of the weather. And you're facing problems farmers face at scale, mentally. And I think that's how you've got to think of things in this way and start to think, right, we've no shortage of ideas. Every single person in this room could give me an idea for an AI improvement or product if I gave you a minute to think about it. But if I asked you to then scale that and gave you some money to scale that, you'd probably fail. And that's because you're not thinking of it as a bigger picture thing. You know, one of the diagrams was, I've drawn a diagram of the rail industry to show the complexity of it. And my point was, it's literally mathematically complex. So you cannot predict, if you do something here, what will happen over here, right? But it's also fractal. So when you take each node of rail and drill down, you open the box, and it looks the same. It's hugely complicated and complex at every level. And so it really does require a mind shift. Whereas when we are typically, if you like, engineers, we tend to come from that stage gate approach of step 1, step 2, step 3 for very good reasons. I wouldn't want a plane built in an agile way. We've somehow got to think with the digital stuff, we've got to start thinking about real flexibility and different approaches. And I just, unless you do that, you will not innovate unless you hit on a happy accident.
Okay.
And from my point of view, you also need a healthy governance. You can't just let it go and think that it will happen. Otherwise, you will end up with a zoo of proof of concepts. So you need to have some top-down view of how you want to scale innovation. And also what you can do is to learn from other industries, for example, or other companies in rail. It's no competition between the railways across the globe. So you can learn from each other. And when there is something that has scaled, ask them how they've done it. Because every country has lots of regulations, lot of rules they need to adhere to. It's not so different. The rule might be different, but the overall ecosystem that you live in is quite similar.
I think what separates a pilot from a scalable transformation is if we have designed it for adoption from the first day. So that's a mindset that we should have taken, and it has been already described. But the thing is, pilots already happen and it is successful because we only use local data. We only have a temporary workaround. We only have a motivated small group of people who drives that. But actually, to be able to scale that up, you need common data foundation. You need integrated with legacy systems. You need to be aligned with safety cases as has been, and we need ownership. And that's beyond individual teams or even platform. This is where GBR should actually play an active role. So if we don't provide these things for the sector, we cannot move from traditional pilot. Yes, we can have a lot of successful technical pilots, but if we cannot scale them up, we end up with a graveyard of pilots. So one important issue is that I consistently come across different teams and different platforms and different parts of the railway don't have consistent definition of one asset type or one event. So it means about how we actually centralize meaning for the sector. So if something has been generated by a private sector or an operator can be used by others, repeatability is very important when we think about scaling up. How much you can think about how other parties can utilize what you have already created. And another important element is workflow integration. When we speak about AI, if your AI pilot only provides some insight in a dashboard, that can only sit aside of your organization, but it needs to be integrated within day-to-day operational decision-making, and it needs to actually inform critical decision every day. And otherwise you don't really create a high-value, innovative solution that the system is willing to integrate that. So when you think about any pilot, when you pick up any use case, think about is it real, is it close to the operation, is it tied to real decision making, and do you have access to the required data across the whole network?
Trying to sum this up in a number of words: grounded, ambition, and connected. So we need, I'll go ambition first. I don't know why I did them in the wrong order. But ambition, we need to realize what is the power of AI, what is the power of data management. We really need to go for it. But it needs to be grounded. We cannot boil the ocean, and we cannot start thinking that we're going to change the way we do things overnight, because we are a safety critical industry, but that should not get in the way of our ambition. And lastly, to deliver those two, we need to do this in a connected way with that leadership of a driven common approach to the way that we do things, because with that, we've then got a way of changing this industry.
Yeah, I just want to say something about attitude as well. I said something to David Horn, the MD of LNER, when I worked there. Once we were celebrating the fact we'd got an increasingly diverse workforce. We were hitting our targets, and and I just accidentally said to him, it's really good news. More accurate diversity, the better. Diversity of thought, etc. I said, so why, when we pull them in, do we put them all in uniform? And there's an intellectual disconnect there. And the same thing happened to me this morning. I'm the only one here not wearing a thing. High vis. I just walked in. Wasn't aware there was a high vis requirement. Why should I wear a high vis? If I'm not going anywhere that's got a safety problem and I need to be seen. But you've all just accepted it. So what are you accepting at work that's stopping you from innovating? I keep coming back to mindset, but actually, I think this is where my benefit of being an artist by background and trade is. That, artists deliberately challenge themselves constantly. Nobody tells an artist how to make things or what to do. They just get up and they start and they ask themselves questions. They go, they fail, they put the painting against the wall, they move on to another one to try and solve the problem. And we could, I think, do with a lot more of that sort of approach intellectually. I think the world of engineering is changing in that sense because of the data and because of the tech around it. Not the hard engineering, by the way, I'm hesitant, But that is also why we've started, first of all, at DFTO with a data platform to try and rationalize data, because it gives us those foundations for people to think differently.
Okay. So next question. I think I'll start with Steve this time because just for a change. If you had to prioritize an action, one thing we could do to unlock innovation at scale in rail, not just experiments, what would it be?
Red rag to a bull. I think we should possibly celebrate some of the innovation that has worked that has had a similar model to what we need to progress with to change this industry. So, for example, in the last 10 years or so, if you're doing engineering work on the railway, you use a system called Sentinel. Some of you, all of us will know it. So that is a system that's been brought in. It's a common approach. It's across the industry, no matter what company you are. And therefore, let's recognise we can do this. Commonality, ambition, drive, and use that to then catapult to do everything else that we need to do.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can unlock innovation only if we have 4 elements. We need technical pathway, we need governance pathway, we need ownership pathway, and funding pathway all together. None of them in isolation can help us to unlock innovation in a system level. And what's happened at the moment, innovation is funded through innovation budgets, and it is not within the as-is businesses. Okay. And there is no clear route for funding. That's the biggest challenges, that there are many great ideas and many great technology, but who is going to fund that? Who is, like, how is the ownership looks like? That's the biggest barrier at the moment.
Okay, Rafael.
I think it's also important, it has been said, to encourage innovation at every level. So everyone should be proud to put an innovation forward, and we should also not be afraid to fail, because we're in an industry that can't fail. And in the innovation, when it's not in a safety critical environment, we can fail, it's okay. We shouldn't always fail, but it's okay to fail. And to take away the pressure to success, I think also encourages encourages the people and brings much more innovations forward.
Okay.
I think a very practical first step that I would change would be to make sure you're all properly data literate, and that you understand the context in which data is increasingly consumed. And I think there's a bit of learning there for that. I think too often you're on the end of data in the sense that information comes to you. But actually, everything you do, you need to start thinking about the data aspects of it. And you can only do that with literacy. So maybe we should do a great data literacy crusade.
Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Yes. One over there. Sorry, do we have a mic? Oh, thanks. Thank you.
Hi, Simon Scott from Fujitsu. Very interesting using conversation, but you've all used the word innovation multiple times. Yeah. I'd like to ask each of the members of the panel what your definition of innovation is, because I'm hearing different understanding.
Okay.
It's a big question. For me, it's changed since 1990 when I first started using, computers for graphics. And I guess innovation is about incremental, I suppose it's about incremental improvement. We often think of it in terms of big steps, but actually it's a complex, we are living in a truly complex ecosystem. And everybody who takes a little step forwards can have unforeseen effects further down the line. And I think innovation is practically that, and intellectually it is about saying, why am I doing this? And that for me is the basis of my entire, weird career. Why am I doing this?
From my point of view, innovation is creating value through something that has not been done like this before. It can be value within a process, it can be value to the outside, but it needs to be attached to some value.
Okay.
Thank you for your question. I always think about that. You're definitely right. Like being in academia and then have a transition to the industry. So innovation perceived very differently in universities and in the industry. When you're doing a PhD, you need to be innovative. You need to add to the state of art. You need to actually present something to the whole world that wasn't presented before. And it doesn't need to be a big thing like boiling the ocean. It can be built up on the incremental changes. And this is how things progress further. But when I came to the industry a few years ago, I quickly noticed that, okay, that's interesting. Innovation doesn't mean you actually need to come up with something totally new that hasn't been used before. It's all about application of concept, methodologies, technologies that haven't been used for your benefit or your organizational benefit. At the moment, we have a valley of this. Like, it has been a lot of great ideas, methodologies, technology that has been created, but no one actually brought that to the operation. And if we can successfully bring any of these and integrate that with our operation, I would call it innovation.
We do two things as an industry, I think. We either run trains to move people and freight around the UK, or we stop trains to do engineering work to improve the infrastructure so that you can do the first thing better. And if the innovation does not improve one or the other, and sometimes it can hinder either, then there's no point doing it. So my parents bought a curved TV many years ago. I don't know what benefit it was. Some people would say that was innovation because it's different, but it actually doesn't give a benefit to the end user. We need to have that in consideration for the way that we properly apply innovation into the industry to either run trains better or to do engineering work safer and cheaper.
Okay. Right. Do we have another question? Yeah, front there.
Hi, good morning. I'm Helen. I work for Capital Delivery within Network Rail, and I've just recently taken a role of innovation as a project manager. So it's really great that from the top down that the investment is there in terms of putting somebody in place to look after the innovation projects. One of the biggest things that I am finding is a culture of being adverse to change. So as a PM, have you got any advice of how I could be an advocate to those that are quite adverse?
Okay. Okay. Advice to a project manager.
Yeah. I think that you are speaking about trust, and trust is a big element. So when you deal with a group of people when it comes to innovation, we have non-believers and we have believers. Believers are technologies passionate people, for example. Non-believers are the ones that actually need evidence to see how a piece of technology, innovation, or AI work. And for it to work, it doesn't need to work by itself. It needs to, the system around it needs to work. So you need to think about how it works perfectly fine around the people, processes, workflows, and what is the produced outcome of that. So I think we just need evidence, like as has been mentioned before, shout out about really good, successful stories more often. And when it comes to uncertainties, specifically with AIs, there was a lot of uncertainties. But we learned something. Okay, we are going toward more trustworthy applications, but it's about, is the data good quality, for example? So we went through a learning curve during the last 2 years to understand what can go wrong and how we can prevent a failure.
Okay, anyone else wants to offer any advice?
From my point of view, it's very important to have advocates within the organization, because you will never be able to convince everyone from the start. But when you have strong advocates, it will go down into the organization and you will get the acceptance. But from my point of view, also from my experience from different railways, it's very important to bring key people close to innovation and walk the talk. They can talk about what they've experienced, and then it's much easier.
I had a job like yours in TfL. I led the innovation for infrastructure in TfL. So focus on what will make a difference, and never be put off by it. Real drive and determination. And success. You will get successes if you have those first two, so celebrate them.
Okay. Do you want to, have you got anything? Yeah.
I wonder sometimes if the rail pension's a bit too good and people don't move enough. You could do with some new ideas. I mean, this is one thing that struck me coming in very late in my career. You know, you could do with people who think different more at the top. And I think the people who get to the top tend to be people who've worked upwards through the industry a bit. So they're taking that idea state with them. But that doesn't mean they can't innovate. So the stuff we did at LNER, for instance, David Horn set it up with Danny to create effectively a brand new team to sort of march in. It was a bit like War of the Worlds. Has anybody read War of the Worlds?
Oh, yeah.
The book, not the film?
Yeah.
Well, if you know, Wells was a Fabian socialist, and he was very critical of the British Empire. And the whole War of the Worlds thing is an allegorical story about the British Empire from the point of view of the natives. Suddenly these unknowable things just march in and change everything. And to an extent, you know, innovation in larger organisations like this need to be treated a bit like that, in that we need to push it properly with a combined viewpoint. And at the moment, it's still fragmented. GBRX is a good thing to do. It's set up to try and do some of this. We're doing a lot of that at DFTO, but it needs even more joining up. And unless you create that culture, it will remain fragmented. And how you create that culture, you know, give me a job to help do it, £2,500 a day, and I'll do it for you.
Okay, one more question. I think probably got time. If anyone wants to? Yeah, in the middle there.
Hello, Andy Elms, former data engineer at Network Rail. I'm just wondering, you seem to encourage innovation. What Network Rail sort of standards and approval processes do you think need to change or be simplified to encourage innovation? Are there some stated standards that are too strict? And how do we sell that?
Well, you've got Network Rail. You've said Network Rail there, but what about GBR and the other half of the industry? You know, they can operate on much more flexible processes to an extent because they're not physically running, you know, trains and have that sort of safety thing. The bigger question there is, how do we make a governance that provides a safe yes rather than an automatic no? And how do we do that so it works across the vastness of GBR? Because it's only GBR now. You know, and we have to stop thinking Network Rail, we have to stop thinking TOC, we have to stop thinking DFTO. It's GBR. How do we do that? To me, I'm answering your question with a question. I don't know.
How would you do that?
Well, that's where I think there's got to be a much bigger examination and change of the culture and some different mindsets in, and to look at process.
GBR or DFTO?
Well, across the whole thing, across GBR, there's got to be a look at what the use cases are, what the processes are, across the thing, not just within the division of what you're doing. So when you're asked to do A, you know, and you create a timeline for doing that, you've got to look at the effects of it on B and C as well. Yeah? From start to finish. So when you're measuring dust coming off a wheel, what are the possible scenarios for that right through to passengers or to freight trains or you know, to the white-collar workers in the office at the freight companies? And there are whole paths of things happening, and we often just get on. It's like getting on a motorway at junction 15 and getting off at junction 5. You know, we need to drive from the start of the motorway to the end of the motorway when we think through things. And that's a really hard thing. We're going to really struggle, and it's going to take a long time, but that's the way we've got to go.
Okay, Rafael, red tape, we could do without.
I might not be able to answer that concrete because I don't know the nitty-gritty, but I think very important is that you start to challenge rules and regulations and also policies, that you think about what you want to achieve and what hurdles there are, because rules are here at the moment. They can be changed and you should challenge that. Also with politics, I see that in, for example, in Switzerland, we had very close relationship with the transport committee, and that's very important to make them aware what the hurdles are when the rule stays in the way they are.
Very good question, thank you. You're definitely right. We need GBR actually to come in here and provide a strategic clarity, because we need purposeful approaches to coordinate change across rail, truck, private and public sector. And we all know one fact, that rail is not really good at change. We all have hesitation to change, and it's for good reason. It's for safety, it's for regulation, because it will impact workforce, it will impact many things. That's exactly why we need this reform right now. This is actually where everything would turn around for us, and this is what you should expect from GBR, a strategic clarity and integration pathway for innovation.
Can you imagine if McDonald's was selling Big Macs today in Birkenhead and Minneapolis? They probably have a data system that tells them the time it takes them to sell those Big Macs in those two different locations. Tonight on the railway, we can't tell you the same thing in terms of the time it takes to enable that engineering work. Remember, we do two things, run trains or do engineering work, because we don't have the data connected in a way in the same standard data form, so I can't tell you what the different times are. So to go to your question, what standard would I approach? Anything that is connecting and collecting data that is critical for the way that we run our business, the McDonald's example, needs to have in the standard the format of that data, so that then at a group level we can then connect it and really properly use it. That's what I would change about standards. Okay, great. I think that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. We're out. It's finished at 11, I believe. So, thanks for coming, everyone. That was really interesting. I think in terms of takeaways, I think we're going through. I think that what we're going through with GBR reform at the moment is an opportunity for innovation, and maybe a unique opportunity in terms of everything coming together, and so much chance for innovation on that track train interface and so on, and the silos being broken down, and the fracturing going, and people joining. So, it's an interesting time, and I'll definitely come back to this subject perhaps next year with a slightly different angle. So, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks for our panel for joining us and just joining with us.